And welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our premier digital educational platform featuring a variety of interactive programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the Deputy Director of Events here at NCIA, and as always, I'm very excited to welcome you all to another edition of our long-running NCIA Committee Insight Series, today being presented by NCIA's Human Resources Committee. One final note to our guests who are joining us for the Facebook live stream. If interested, follow the short link in the video description to secure a spot in today's session directly inside the platform so you don't miss out on all the interactive elements of today's program. One quick note and shout out to the presenting sponsor for today's session, March Networks. I know that there's a few team members from their team joining us today. They'll be posting throughout the session inside of the chat room. So if you're interested in learning more about their products or services, feel free to engage with any of their team members directly throughout the program, or you can learn more by heading to their website, www.marchnetworks.com. All right, now let's get this show on the road. In today's program entitled Top Challenges for Cannabis Industry Employers Emerging from the Pandemic, we've assembled a panel of leading experts from NCIA's Human Resources Committee to examine some key challenges facing cannabis businesses emerging from the pandemic. Along the way, they'll provide practical considerations for reducing a number of potential liabilities for both remote and returning workforces. I know our audience is eager to participate in this discussion and get their questions answered today, so let's not waste any more time. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome our moderator for today's session, Dean Rocco, partner at Wilson Elser, to the virtual stage to introduce our panel of cannabis HR and legal specialists. You can activate your video feed now and take it away from here, Dean.
Thanks, Brian, and good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are this morning or afternoon. Looking forward to speaking with you today about these HR employment law related issues with my fellow panelists, Melissa Hafey and Jeff David. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. My claim to fame is I am a partner with Wilson Elser, and in addition to being a labor and employment lawyer for the better part of 15 years, about 6 years ago, I, along with a partner of mine, launched our cannabis practice group. So the subjects that we're talking about today have merged, and I've spent the last several years working with cannabis clients in a number of places around the country and in the world on a number of issues, including the type and kind of things that we're going to be talking about today. So I look forward to being with you today. Melissa, maybe you can just spend a moment introducing yourself.
Hi, thanks, Dean. I'm excited to be here with you guys today, and I'm looking forward to talking about this. As an HR director, I'm living and breathing our response to COVID and managing our work from home employees all of the time. As I said, I'm an HR director. I work for a company called Blackbird Logistics. We are a software and services company that offers marketing tools and transportation solutions to cannabis operators. I've been in this role for almost 3 years, and that's been my entire time in cannabis. Prior to cannabis, I worked for our local university in an administrative role, and I also did HR for some other small companies. So I am, well versed in managing HR on a shoestring, so to speak. So for small companies, and I love relationships with attorneys. So I'm excited to be here today with Dean and Jeff.
And Jeff, maybe introduce yourself before we get into the meat and potatoes of this thing.
Sure. Thanks, Dean. My name is Jeff David. I'm also an attorney. I'm a shareholder at Collin Jensen in Newport Beach, California. For the past several years, I have been advising clients in the cannabis space on employment issues. We litigate any type of employment disputes that arise, but I really like to focus on advising clients on issues as they arise, on policies and procedures, and trying to really get ahead of potential issues before they become something where you're calling me because the complaint has been filed or a demand has been made in arbitration. Because I really think that employment issues are important, and it's, a lot easier to get out ahead of things, and that's where I really try to bring a lot of value.
Perfect. That's a great segue for today's discussion, where we're going to try to keep some people out of courtrooms and give them some perspectives that might guide their decisions about some of these pandemic-induced issues. And the first one, Brian, if I could have you throw up that first poll for us, and we'll just get some perspectives from folks as to whether or not you have yet mandated a vaccination in your workplace. And if you can go ahead and answer that, we'll put the results up for folks as we get into this discussion. I know this is one of the areas where over the last 6 months or so, we started hearing whispers of vaccines being close and what would employers do with them. And certainly since December when we had launch, it's been a big topic of discussion. And while we're putting those poll results up, yeah, 90%, not surprising. That seems to be about right for the general public outside of healthcare or some of the real frontline workers. But Jeff, why don't you get us started here? Just sort of give folks an idea about legalization, or I shouldn't say legalization. Maybe that's just a cannabis slip. Whether or not vaccines are considered to be legal when they're mandated, and just get it going there.
Sure. So the threshold question, especially now as the vaccines become much more widely and commonly available, is can you mandate a vaccine in the workplace? And the answer is yes. A vaccine mandate is permissible. The EEOC has issued its guidance saying as much, that an employer can mandate a vaccine under its ability to require employees not to pose a direct threat to the health or safety of individuals in the workplace. Now, that's the EEOC's fancy legal formulation for essentially saying, because a sick employee or someone with COVID would threaten the safety of other employees by obviously threatening to expose them to COVID, the employer can require the vaccine. But as I'm sure we all know, whether or not you can do something is not the end of the inquiry. How can you do it? And the first thing to consider when discussing whether or not you're going to make the vaccination a requirement of the workplace is what you're going to do about employees who protest. There are, as I'm sure people have seen, a somewhat large population, not a majority, but certainly a good percentage of people in the country who are skeptical or not believing in the vaccine or not ready to get the vaccination. So what can you do if you have a mandate in place and you have employees who are saying, well, I'm not going to get it? And that's going to require something of an individual analysis. Again, the EEOC has been really, I think, throughout the pandemic, on top of things and acted quickly to address these types of questions and considerations. So for the mandate of a vaccination, the question of whether or not an employee can opt out is a question of whether or not they need to be accommodated. In other words, if a vaccination requirement would screen out an individual with a disability, then the employer must show that the unvaccinated employee was analyzed under 4 factors. What we're trying to figure out is whether or not a direct threat exists if the employee goes unvaccinated and returns to the workplace. The 4 factors to consider are the duration of the risk. Sorry, I'm on the screen here. The nature and severity of the potential harm, the likelihood that the potential harm will occur, and the imminence of the potential harm. And I think given our experience with the pandemic and with COVID-19, certainly all of those would seemingly be met just depending on maybe your specific geography. But the pandemic has obviously gone on for quite some time. The severity of it varies, but certainly people are dying. Other people suffer from its symptoms for months. and the likelihood that it will be harmful is pretty great, right? We had to shut down the country, or we tried to, for a reason, and the imminence is that it's still happening. So if the employee asking to be exempt from the mandate needs to be accommodated, because they represent a direct threat, what can you do? We're going to talk about this more in a bit, but the question becomes whether or not they can work from home. And because of the pandemic, that becomes a lot more complicated of a question than it would have been a year ago, or maybe 13, 14 months ago. Only if no reasonable accommodation can be made, can an employee be excluded. And one question as we move forward from here, as we address these four factors, is how does the potential harm analysis change as the rest of your workforce gets vaccinated? In other words, it's easy to say that an unvaccinated employee is a risk to the rest of your employees because they're also unvaccinated. But if almost all of your other employees are vaccinated, is that unvaccinated employee really a risk factor? At this point, that's an unknown. I think there are strong arguments to be made that yes, they are still at risk, but that's something that's just going to have to be borne out. Another potential accommodation is if someone doesn't want the vaccination for religious reasons, and essentially we go through the same analysis there. So that's the EEOC. OSHA, which has also issued some guidance. It's been very clear that it has not issued a binding standard or a regulation. So this is only advisory in nature and does not create any new legal obligations. OSHA has not required a mandate for employee vaccinations, but it has encouraged employers to make vaccines available at no cost to eligible employees if possible. What does that mean when the vaccine is essentially free for everybody? Potentially, it means acting as if the time spent getting the vaccine is on the clock and paying employees to get it. And finally, the CDC also has a workplace vaccination program that encourages employers to build confidence in vaccines, raises the potential for on and off-site vaccination options depending on the size of your workforce, but notes that the FDA also has not mandated vaccination.
Thanks for that. Before I flip it over to Melissa to get her perspectives on this, just to round out some of the discussion there, from a law standpoint, most of what Jeff is covering has been coming to us from the federal government. At a state level, there's certainly a lot of encouragement and suggestion about employers having their employees get vaccinated, but there haven't really been any real concrete legislative enactments that either prohibit or govern and authorize mandates themselves. There is sort of an interesting argument that's floating around out there. Some people have looked at the emergency use authorizations that the vaccines that you see in front of you have been given, and they've noted the fact that an EUA authorization requires the manufacturers and stakeholders to inform recipients about the vaccine's risk and the fact that receiving it is voluntary. And they've argued that means an employer can't mandate a vaccine. My personal view is that tends to conflate two different issues. One is the FDA telling doctors' offices, CVS, Walgreens, the people that are rolling this out, that these are the notices you need to give to consumers, and employers, on the other hand, telling their employees what they can or can't do vis-a-vis their employment. And there'll just be some ramifications if they exercise their free will and decide not to get a vaccine. Now, a New Mexico public employee filed a lawsuit about a month ago against a municipal employer there challenging their employer mandate for a vaccination, adopting that argument that any EU vaccination must remain voluntary. We don't have a ruling there. And then maybe 2-3 weeks ago, this is COVID, so everything sort of blends together time-wise, but about 2 weeks ago, a group of employees filed a lawsuit against the Los Angeles School District in federal court. And that borrows the same arguments that EU vaccinations are by definition voluntary and cannot be forced on employees. Now, they're both borrowing that sort of novel argument. It's interesting that both of those lawsuits are against public employers. So those individuals have the argument that the government is telling them that they have to take a vaccine, which is a little bit stronger of an argument than if, you know, my law firm Wilson Elser told its employees to get vaccinated. But we'll have to see how those turn out and whether or not that sets a precedent for private employers on a going forward basis. So just stay tuned as you're giving or putting your thoughts together around vaccinations and mandates. Melissa, maybe you could just give us some perspective here. What are the practical realities about implementing a policy like a vaccination mandate?
Yeah, thanks. So, I mean, like we saw in the poll, I think most employers are not planning on mandating vaccines in their workplace because of the practical considerations. We don't want to put employees in a position to have to reveal to us why they're not getting a vaccine. Of course, there's going to, you know, if there's a religious reason or a medical disability that precludes their ability to get a vaccine, we're going to have to move through the interactive process for those employees, perhaps come up with accommodations for them to continue working or make a decision to exclude a worker from the workplace. And those are some very touchy subjects that I think many employers are hesitant to address. And so the other option for employers is to strongly encourage vaccines, or to equip employees with as much information as possible to make the right decision. And from an employer's point of view, the right decision is probably that the employee gets their vaccine. So that's the approach that my employer has taken, or that I've designed at my company. It's unlikely that you may choose to do, as we've seen from the poll, it's unlikely that your company is choosing to mandate vaccines. So you're left with the task to encourage your population to get vaccinated. Why do you want to encourage your employees to get vaccinated? It's important to answer this question with your leadership team so that you're all on the same page. And when you're speaking to employees, you have that argument for why it's important that your workforce is vaccinated ready. I would define a clear business objective for launching a vaccine campaign. It's a great place to start at your company, and it will guide decision-making around your policy. For our company, our reasons to encourage vaccines include the belief that vaccines are the best way to protect employees from the direct threat of exposure to COVID-19, like Jeff mentioned. Since we can't eliminate public interaction completely for all of our employees, we want to return to normal, right? We also believe that a vaccinated public and workforce will help end the patchwork of state-to-state restrictions that we're dealing with now. We are a multi-state employer. So for HR, I have to monitor the kind of relaxing of stay-at-home restrictions across all of the states where I have employees, and help guide employees about their decision-making in all those different regulatory environments. And that's very complicated in an already very complicated industry, right? We're looking forward to a future where we can relax or eliminate some of the employment practices that we put in place at the start of the pandemic. So my work from home population, is looking forward to being able to at least have some face-to-face meetings back in the office environment. Some of our employees may want to return to work altogether. Our employees who are parents who've been working from home with their kids side by side for the last 12 months are probably looking forward to those kids being able to go back to school and life just getting back to normal. So for all these reasons, we are strongly encouraging that all of our employees get vaccinated, short of mandating it. So how are we encouraging them? At our company, we have chosen to do a strategy with 3 different approaches. Our 3 approaches are to persuade, to empower, and then to accommodate. So persuading means we're including communication about how awesome it's going to be when we're all vaccinated. So we're painting the picture of what it's going to look like when the nation can return to normal post-pandemic. For me, when President Biden talked a couple of weeks ago about having regular picnics and barbecues by the 4th of July holiday, I was just inspired and overcome with a longing to get back to normal. The image of a pre-pandemic summer for me was very motivating. HR departments need to find out what's motivating to their employees. What are your employees' motivators? Office parties, face-to-face or in-person meetings again, and into Zoom calls. Figure out what it is and paint that picture for your staff. Persuading may also include incentives like additional PTO or even a gift card after the employee provides proof of completed vaccines. And Dean and Jeff might want to talk a little bit about, avoiding discrimination when we're providing incentives, but I would be prepared to have some sort of, tangible encouragement for employees to get the vaccine. And of course, be careful not to create a situation where those employees who can't get vaccinated because of a bona fide religious or medical exclusion are being discriminated against. Another tactic that we're trying is to have influential employees in the workplace talk about getting vaccines, talk about their experience getting the vaccine, be vocal about taking the time off to go to their vaccine appointment, and if they're experiencing side effects, talking about how they manage them. So definitely our leadership team all became vaccinated and led as a role model by example for the rest of the workforce. The second strategy I mentioned was to empower. This was especially important in the earlier days of vaccine eligibility, when that eligibility was restricted and different workforces or essential workers were being allowed to get vaccinated at different times. So HR had a role to explain when employees would become eligible under state vaccine distribution plans. And I'll just also mention that state vaccine distribution plans are very dependent on employer to employee communication, right? That's a lot of how they were able to describe eligibility in the early days when vaccine eligibility was restricted. Now it looks more like making sure employees know what their resources are to get the vaccine, where they can go to make an appointment, what to expect before and after the vaccine, and providing paid time off for the appointments and then to recover from side effects. Consider providing transportation or reimbursing employees who have to use a rideshare option to get their vaccines. This is something I only realized after talking to supervisors and employees as they were trying to manage the logistics of going to their vaccine appointment. In some states or in some areas, it is still very dependent on you having a personal form of transportation to get the vaccine. So you're in a car in a line, you stick your shoulder out the car window to get the vaccine. For your employees who don't have a personal vehicle, that means that they're having to take an Uber or a Lyft potentially, or get a ride from someone. So I would just recognize that might be a barrier for some employees to getting the vaccine and be ready to address that, mitigate that barrier. So basically the strategy of empowering is to remove barriers for people to get the vaccine. So it might also include providing information to dispel myths about vaccines or other factors of vaccine hesitancy. And then the third one I mentioned was to accommodate. So not everyone is going to be able to get a vaccine right away or at all. Be gracious about giving employees plenty of time and space to make the decision to get vaccinated. For some people, it's going to take some time for them to get there. Accommodate those who have sincerely held religious beliefs or disabilities that prevent them from getting the vaccine. And don't ask employees why they haven't gotten the vaccine. I just would avoid engaging in the debate or making it about a personal decision. Just give them plenty of time, and I think most employees will come around. Many are not going to be able to immediately get the vaccine because of any number of reasons. So if you ask why, you're going to run a real risk of exposing confidential information or information that you just don't want to know. Be sure that your supervisors and managers are genuinely allowing employees to take time off from their work schedules to get the vaccine appointment and to recover from side effects. So don't make sure at your company, HR is not saying everybody can use paid time off freely and go and get the vaccine and take time off for your side effects. But in the meantime, your supervisor is telling employees, I'm short-staffed, and if you take time off, it's going to really cause us, put us all in a bind or whatever. So make sure everybody in the company is on the same page and we're all encouraging it with one voice that the vaccines are important. So just to sum up, at my company, we are doing three things: persuade, empowering, and accommodating. Vaccine hesitancy overall in the United States is receding. I believe that people will come around on their own and in their own time. Our role as employers is to support and reinforce the decision to get vaccinated. But make no mistake, we do have a role. We have some responsibility nationwide to make sure that we are encouraging employees to get vaccinated so we can move towards herd immunity. So creating a sound policy around vaccines, whether or not you're requiring them, is really important as we look to seeing the tail end of this pandemic.
Awesome perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And you triggered a couple questions that I think maybe just take them real quick because I think they can we can time up pretty quick. There was a question in the question box about how does a mandate and HIPAA regulation reconcile, and somebody else asked a similar question: can employers require employees to disclose whether or not they've gotten the vaccine? On those 2 points, I guess what I would just say is, as of right now, the EEOC's guidance is really focused on pre-vaccination questions where you're asking someone what the counterindications are and you're asking about their medical health. That's the sort of stuff that gets you into the universe of scrutiny under the ADA. But simply asking somebody to provide you proof that they have a vaccination, a card or some sort of a documentation from a provider is not considered a medical examination that would get you in trouble. And the EEOC currently says you're okay requesting that sort of thing. I think whether you're talking about the Health Information Portability Protection Act or just looking at general employment laws, and even the EEOC's guidance on the subject of vaccination mandates makes very clear that if employees are giving you information about their health, you need to keep it private. Certainly, if somebody were to get into one of the conversations we've sort of hinted at, where they're telling you, I can't get vaccination because I'm allergic to the ingredients in it, or I have an underlying health condition that my doctor's telling me it's dangerous for me to get this vaccination right now, those sort of conversations and the information that you would glean from an employee there all needs to be kept confidential and all needs to be maintained in a private way that would be consistent with HIPAA. I don't know if Jeff, do you want to take that other question that was in there?
Sure. So we also got a question. We also got a question about the American Rescue Plan Act that was recently passed and went into effect. And the question is whether, if employers do not want to comply with the ARPA's time off rules, can they still give employees time off just for the vaccine and vaccine recovery? I think the answer there is yes. The ARPA mandates specific time off rules that require the employer to give time off for a number of reasons beyond just getting vaccinated. But the carrot there for doing so is that it's allowing the employer to claim tax credits. So if you want to claim the tax credits that the ARPA allows for, then yes, you do have to comply with all of those time off rules. But if you just want to give employees time off for the vaccine and vaccine recovery, you can do that separate from anything under the ARPA.
Yeah, I agree.
Just so don't
Brian,
claim the tax credits.
Yeah. I heard it on a webinar and Jeff told me I could do it.
Yeah.
Brian, if you could throw up that other poll, we're going to switch gears here. If you have other questions about vaccinations or vaccination mandates, feel free to throw them in the question and answer box, and we can pull them up. We're going to move to a discussion around managing the return. Managing remote workers and sort of what's come about with this remote workforce.
I think
Brian,
we're sorry.
Yeah,
I think
we're one slide too far on Brian.
Yeah.
If you can go backwards. There you go. And then if you want to throw up that poll results. There we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about managing the remote workforce. This has been, I think, at first sort of haphazard and chaotic, and we've sort of settled into some sense of normalcy just in time for us to have to change all over again and start bringing people back to work and figuring out how many people and who will and under what conditions that would all happen. But maybe you could just let us know sort of what your biggest challenge has been managing that remote workforce that all had to run for the hills when this pandemic came about. All right, Melissa, you got some work to do at the end of this to talk about that last issue. But it's interesting. I think Jeff and I see the legal side of this, every day, and we have a hyper focus on it. But I know talking with Melissa in advance of this program, that last issue around employee engagement and morale has been one that's certainly top of mind for her, and so it'll be good to talk about that a little bit. Just real quick, as we get into the sort of the legal side of it, there's been a number of issues that have been popping up. Jeff will hit some of the wage and hour expense reimbursement things, which are very important. I would just mention that as we had businesses moving over to remote work arrangements during the pandemic, there were a lot of businesses that were pushing their systems well beyond, their existing firewalls and security systems. And then you had this wonderful cross-pollination of employees' personal devices and home Wi-Fi networks and people working from all sorts of different places. And you really created this, and at the same time, employers were trying to keep an eye on their people and try to figure out, is Dean sleeping at his desk, or is he actually being productive? And how do I monitor him at home? And how do I communicate with him at home? And it created sort of this perfect petri dish to raise up a lot of cyber crime, a lot of cyber attacks, and then also trigger some real issues surrounding privacy and privacy rights of employees. When it relates to cyber crime, by April, the cyber attack hotlines and complaints that the FBI monitors were up 400%. So in a matter of 6 weeks, cyber criminals were going gangbusters and shifting away from, phishing attacks on individuals to small businesses and medium and even some major large corporations. They were definitely taking advantage of that rapid deployment of remote systems and people working from home to try to tap into that. And if you haven't already addressed that in your own business, it's definitely something to be looking at. But beyond that, there was a huge issue around employee privacy. And I've sort of joked before that this is not just simply people forgetting that their cameras are on and joining, conference calls or Zoom meetings in their underwear. But this is really more about employers trying to track employee productivity and employees working from home. And there are, systems that you can put in place to track productivity and to track people working from home that are legal. But there are also examples where it just simply will cross a line that you can't cross. To sort of illustrate that there's a marked difference between sending people home with work-issued computers or laptops, and then using software to remotely monitor their work emails, as opposed to installing software on a personal computer or requiring individuals to use applications or log into systems that would allow you to monitor their personal emails and their personal folders inside their personal computers. So when you're rolling out these sort of remote working systems and programs, you really need to give some thought around those privacy and cyber risks, and really particularly if your employees are going to have access to your clients' sensitive financial or medical information from remote locations. Beyond that, Jeff, maybe you could just hit the expense reimbursement issue, which has been a big one for you and I over the last several months.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So there are currently 10 jurisdictions that have reimbursement laws, some of them pretty big. California, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., Seattle, and some other states, Iowa, Illinois, Montana, New Hampshire, the Dakotas, that require reimbursement for reasonable or necessary business expenses. There are also states that require companies to essentially stick to their word. In other words, if an employer has a written policy that permits necessary business expense reimbursement, then the state law says you got to stick to that. You can't suddenly change it or not comply with your own policy. So how does that impact, an employer during this pandemic? Well, there have suddenly been a lot more necessary expenses for people working from home than otherwise than there had been in the past. For example, if you're requiring someone to work from home, suddenly their internet is necessary. Their computer is necessary if they don't have one, or and a cell phone. Maybe they only have a landline. Suddenly the cell phone, even if they already had one, a cell phone is now necessary for them to work from home. So if something is necessary for that work, then depending on the jurisdiction you're in or what your own policies say, the employer is going to have to pay for that. Even if I have a cell phone already and my employer now says, okay, you're going to have to work from home for a while, that means that cell phone is now necessary for work and my employer is on the hook for some of it. The key there is some of it, at least in California. And again, look into your specific jurisdiction. But for California, the requirement is that the employer pay a portion of it, since it's something like my cell phone is not used exclusively for work. An example, my firm has, during the pandemic, paid a $20 stipend for my internet, for all employers' internet, or I'm sorry, employees' internet. So because we've been working from home, because that's been necessary, we've been paid the $20 for that. And also I think $10 or $15 for cell phone. If moving forward, work from home becomes an option, but not a necessary requirement. In other words, the office is open, they are able to come to work and get all of their work done at the office, then it's no longer necessary, and that requirement to pay expenses goes away. If you decide that you want to pay, or you have been paying a portion of expenses, then you want to best practice would be to document the reasonableness in case it becomes an issue, and it can become an issue on both sides. If you're not paying enough, then you haven't been properly reimbursing them. If you're paying too much, then it's really improperly a wage. So you want to figure out what the right number is, document how you did that, and just keep that in a file cabinet somewhere in case something happens. If you don't want to do a stipend, you can also just go with, most companies already have in place an expense reimbursement request process, and that can just be promulgated and distributed widely, and employees encouraged to make use of it for work from home pandemic related business expenses.
And then bringing this back to the practical, Melissa, transitioning from temporary to permanent remote plans, increasing flexibility in working environments, tackling engagement with remote workers, that's all been your nightmare or headache or challenge, however you want to look at it. Maybe lend us some perspectives on sort of what's been successful and how folks can achieve success in this arena.
Yeah, and I think I'll just touch on a comment that I saw come through the chat, and then Jeff's final remark about expense, kind of what might have been pre-pandemic expense reimbursement policies. And then maybe it sounded like on the chat, somebody had an idea of what if you haven't been doing reimbursements for internet, for example, for the last 15 months, but you want to going forward? Do you need to consider reimbursing employees for all of this past time when you haven't been doing a reimbursement practice? And I'll say all of these are some of those practical considerations that are difficult for leadership and HR teams to manage, kind of on the fly, because we didn't anticipate that these were going to be such long-term changes to our employment arrangements. In my experience, employment or expense reimbursement mechanisms that worked pre-pandemic have not been as successful during the pandemic with the work from home because they're inconsistently applied. So one employee may ask for a cell phone reimbursement every month. Another employee never asks for it, but both employees are equally required to rely on their personal cell phone for work. So I don't like the unevenness of those expense reimbursement policies. I prefer the stipend reimbursement, where all employees who are in the same work arrangement get the same anticipated reimbursement. And then I don't know, Dean and Jeff, if you want to weigh in, but if you haven't been reimbursing and you choose to begin doing that now, you may want to acknowledge the previous months where you didn't do a reimbursement through some sort of I don't know if you would do a month to month or, match dollar for dollar. The policy's new. The policy for reimbursement is new. Going forward, you're going to apply it consistently for all employees, but you may also want to acknowledge that you didn't have a policy in the past and do something to address that going backwards. And then I'll just say that, like I mentioned, the shift to work from home status was an unprecedented and emergency response. So we thought that we were sending people home, for example, at my company, we thought that we were sending people home for 30 days maybe. And then we reassessed in midsummer and decided we're going to keep people home through the end of the calendar year. The end of the calendar year came along and we extended that temporary work from home arrangement, indefinitely until state restrictions changed and vaccines were widely available. So if that's the case, if you have had employees on a work from home arrangement for the last 15 months and you're still anticipating that they'll be on work from home for several additional months, there's now become a situation where we've demonstrated that employees can perform work from home. And employees have become very accustomed to that work from home arrangement. And for some, they may perceive it now as a benefit of their work. And if we try to take it away, they're going to perceive that as a reduced benefit for work. And after a very difficult year, nobody wants to see any benefits reduced. So now is a time, if you haven't already, to begin looking into how you can make your temporary work from home arrangements permanent. And that doesn't necessarily mean that all the employees that you sent home to a work from home stay work from home completely forever, but it might mean you're looking into a hybrid work arrangement where employees can work from home some days of the week and be in the office some days of the week, or a certain number of hours or days that employees can do work from home on their own, as a flexible work arrangement where they can decide on their own. And then some employees might want to be all the way back in the office 100% of the time. Some employees may want to be home 100% of the time because it suits their work arrangement. These are all the considerations that now can be back on the table, and you could think about as creating your more durable work from home policy around these considerations. So at my work site, we have employees who can work from home, who did work from home during all of this pandemic time, and then other employees who can't work from home, who have to perform their work on site. I'm sure that's the same for many cannabis companies. If you're in a cultivation facility or a dispensary, there have to be some employees who are interacting with the public and interacting with each other in a face-to-face environment. This creates this disparity or this difference between your different workforce populations. Employees who can work from home, who are able to work from home, for example, don't have to call in sick when they've been exposed to coronavirus. Employees who are unvaccinated who are exposed to COVID have to quarantine and use up a bunch of sick time, miss work. So, thinking about how we address that difference in work arrangements for those two different populations is important. It does wear on people over time when they have to miss work, especially if you have an individual who's had to quarantine more than once over the last 12 to 15 months. Also, that imperative or that urgency to get vaccinated weighs more heavily on the workforce that is face-to-face than those employees who are work from home. And it's going to be a different conversation when you're talking about vaccines, or in my case anyways, if I'm talking to a work from home employee and they have some vaccine hesitancy, a lot less urgency for that employee to get vaccinated because they can continue maybe working from home. But my employee who's going to interact with the public, that employee, I really want to encourage them strongly to get vaccinated for their protection and for the protection of those that they're going to interact with in our communities. So, now that there's this reality that employees can perform their jobs while at home, that work arrangement, like I said, might be perceived as a benefit. It may benefit you as you're recruiting or competing with other employers. It also may help you stand out as an employer to be able to continue to offer that benefit. And certainly, and that applies to reimbursements too. How you're lining up your package for reimbursing employees for their at-home technology and things like that. Just remember that you're going to be compared potentially against other employers, and so you want to put together something that's attractive, regardless of whether or not you're compelled to legally reimburse employees for technology at home and things like that. Let me see if I just have any other, some practical problems that come along with designing your work from home policy that we didn't consider because of the emergency work from home status. So when I immediately sent employees home last year, I didn't worry about things like whether or not were going to be also performing childcare duties simultaneously, because there was no option. we had to expect that employees would be home and be home alongside their children. But going forward, as you create your long-term work from home policy, do you want to have any language about whether or not there needs to be alternative childcare for your employee while they're doing their work from home? Also, how flexible can the schedule be? Can employees do their work, after 6 o'clock in the evening and be off in the earlier part of the day? Is that something that you want to retain into the future? It might have been okay during the pandemic, but maybe it's not going to work in the long run. Again, like stipends and reimbursement, what is going to be attractive to future employees, but also what is sustainable for the company to continue to provide. And aside from internet and cell phone reimbursement, there are other considerations like providing an ergonomic workstation. Would you reimburse an employee for a new office chair, for a fancier keyboard with the little pads to rest their wrists on, for a monitor stand, for better lighting, for all of these things that you would provide in a face-to-face office environment? How far will you go providing those things for the employee in their home office environment? And what happens when the employee separates from your company? Do they keep those items, or are they company property if the company paid for them? And then the logistics of trying to return those items. And then there's also office incidentals. If your employee's using their personal printer, in my company, I went home with my company laptop, but I did not take home a company printer. So if I need to print some items, those are things I'm using my personal equipment for. Would you provide any kind of reimbursement for those types of office place incidentals? And then there are bigger questions like, can an employee relocate to a different state that you're not currently doing business in? So I am a multi-state employer. I do have an employer registration in many different states, but not in every state. And if an employee wants to relocate because they're working from home to a new state, how much advance notice does the employer need? And who would be considered eligible to relocate to a new state and who might not be? For example, if you have any non-exempt employees who are working from home, would they be ineligible for a relocation to a new state? And it's just I just want to stress that you should consider all of these ideas in advance and make them part of your very comprehensive work from home or remote worker policies, so that you don't have to make case-by-case decisions going into the future, because that's where we'll get into potential trouble with our workers, and that's when they'll start to perceive discrimination or unfair treatment and have hurt feelings, frankly.
Great perspectives. Yeah, that's something we've been doing more over the last 2 months, and I think your advice to people about putting together a comprehensive remote workforce telecommuting policy now is really wise, and people should really should heed that advice. And I'm just looking through the questions here. I think we're pretty good there. Brian, if you could put up that other poll question for us. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and in the interest of time, we'll just sort of jump into that. If I missed a question, we can try to catch it at the end. But we're really going to move now to a discussion around returning workers to the workplace. And along those lines, Melissa, if you had a chance to catch your breath, maybe you could start us off with a discussion around the morale and workplace culture issues once we get the poll results here. Good stuff.
Yeah, so it looks like many of you are looking forward to some increased work from home flexibility. So maybe thinking more open-mindedly about work from home arrangements. We might be looking at hybrid work arrangements, like I mentioned earlier, where employees are doing some combination of continued work from home and coming to the office. But certainly we are, I think, nationwide employers are just much more open-minded to continuing or allowing some work from home than we were previously. And like we touched on earlier in the presentation, productivity in the early stages of the pandemic seemed to be an issue. There was a lot of concern from managers about how they could ensure that their workers were performing work at home while they were at home, and maybe some notion that if we're at home, we would be slacking off, right? I don't know, playing board games with the kids instead of doing our work or something along those lines. That turned out to not be the case, right? For the most part, those worries were unfounded. And what we saw again and again in research was that employees were actually maybe even erring on the side of being overcommitted to work or overproductive. A lot of people who are on work from home status reported having a hard time maintaining the boundary between work and home life because your work computer is sitting there on your living room sofa. Maybe you log in to check some emails and an hour goes by and you've just been working well beyond the end of the workday. Or you stop taking breaks. I know in my case, it's been hard to take a lunch break or walk over to the break room and have a little conversation with somebody and just have some of that off of my computer time in the workday. So I think all of that was in the early stages of the pandemic. And now that we're moving into year 2, we need to take a look again at productivity. Are those same habits of overworking, of having blurred lines between our work and home life, are they continuing, or are people's, as we adjust to the length of time that we've been on work from home, is that productivity changing, our habits changing? And I think that they are. I think that people are getting tired of work from home and are beginning to emerge new habits that approach their work differently. For example, employees may be starting the workday a little bit later and working later into the day, taking longer breaks in the middle of the day, because some of those practices we had in the beginning part of the pandemic just weren't sustainable in the long run. And I'll just also say that, for me, the concern here is that we've been operating in emergency pandemic mode for the last 14 months. A lot of our decisions in the early part of the pandemic were informed by state restrictions, and we were compelled to adhere to those. As those state restrictions are relaxing, there's going to be more room for interpretation through company policy. So more opportunity for you to make decisions for your company that suit your workforce. For example, if your state no longer requires masks to be worn in public, will your company create an internal policy that requires employees or clients and customers to continue to wear masks? As we already discussed, most companies will probably not require or mandate vaccines, but there will need to be a transparent company policy around protecting workers who aren't vaccinated, if you have a portion of your workforce that is not vaccinated. What employees who are and are not vaccinated are eligible to do. For example, can they travel for business purposes? You might adjust your quarantine requirements for employees around whether or not they have been vaccinated. So for example, if somebody's been exposed to COVID and they are fully vaccinated, they likely can continue working depending on your state guidelines. So these are new challenges and the potential to create some divisions within your workforce, right? Some different ways that we have to interact with employees. And then in addition, there are folks that are going to be experiencing the pandemic fatigue. Like I mentioned, it's been a long year. And for some employees, they may have been operating in survival mode for many months, which kept their energy high, it kept them creative about solving solutions. But now that we can kind of collectively exhale as a nation and prepare for an end to the pandemic, there will be people, and I'm particularly concerned about employees in positions of leadership in our HR departments, who are just now kind of taking stock of everything they've been through over the last year, and they're finding that they're now dealing with or recognizing the emotional fallout of managing a global emergency for months on end. So we may be embarking on a new phase or stage of the pandemic that will be challenging in new ways that our current tools are not adequately addressing. One thing that I'm looking to emphasize is to make sure that employees are using paid time off or vacation time. A lot of our employees delayed taking time off in 2020 because of travel restrictions and stay-at-home orders, but it's been an exhausting year and people need to take a real break and unplug or they risk burning out. This summer can be a time to celebrate bringing your teams back together in your workforce. Even if you're not bringing back all your work from home employees, you can bring them in for some office face-to-face time with some, celebrating some milestones or some anniversaries, something festive and fun. Give people a genuine opportunity to reconnect with each other and the space to explore new ways to adapt those practices that were working well through the pandemic to our future post-pandemic workplaces. So there are things that we had to do in response to the emergency that we didn't really question, we just did. Some of those worked well for us and we'll want to continue them into the post-pandemic future. Some of them didn't work as well and we'll want to be able to give our employees and our managers the space and the time to evaluate which of those practices they're going to continue and which they're looking forward to shedding. And this might, look like time, like I just said, to conduct those face-to-face activities and unstructured time. So a lot of the pandemic, we are meeting on Zoom calls, and our time is very structured, but we haven't had as much time to connect socially with each other. And it is those social connections that are so important for creating a community in your workplace and giving employees something that they feel like they belong to, aside from the work directives. So make sure that you're providing that time as we're able to move forward in this post-pandemic atmosphere.
Good stuff. Jeff, could you quickly just sort of give folks an idea of what to do when they say, all right, doors are open, everybody back, and Mr. Smith says, I ain't coming?
Yeah, and I'll try to move quickly. And if anyone has any questions about anything we're covering, especially towards the end, I just want to remind you that you'll get our contact information at the end of the presentation if you'd want to follow up. But very briefly, the question essentially is, can an employer compel attendance to work? Are employees suddenly able to work from home based on basically their own decision? And the answer is that yes, you can still compel attendance to work. And of course, there's also a but, because there always is. And that but is the same one that we had with the mandatory vaccination program, which is you need to be cognizant of any type of accommodation issue that might arise. So essentially, the employer can say, everyone needs to come to work. An employee can say, I don't want to. And at that point, then the parties engage in the interactive process. Why doesn't the employee want to return to work? Is there a doctor's note? What's the issue? Generalized concerns are not generally a good reason to excuse versus a specific risk factor. That could be, according to the EEOC, not wanting to risk exposure of a family member is not an acceptable reason to need an accommodation. And once you recognize whether or not an accommodation is necessary, you move on to what kind of accommodation can we do. The challenge now and moving forward is establishing why it was okay to work from home during the pandemic, but not after, if you're requiring people to come back to work. And I want to note that the EEOC has issued guidance and suggested that previous requests to work from home that were denied pre-pandemic should be reconsidered in light of the pandemic work from home experience. So if you're going to start bringing people back and you want to refuse accommodations, you really need to consider what has changed from during the pandemic to post-pandemic that would justify requiring people to return back to work.
Good stuff. Yeah, I know before COVID, we would say things like, it's really expensive, there's a bunch of technology, and some of those hurdles have been resolved now, but there's still probably going to be some value to having people together and sort of the things that Melissa was talking about, where if you feel that's important, to Jeff's point, you got to really emphasize that on a going forward basis so that you can, justify why you have people coming in as opposed to simply working remote. We're getting up on the end of the hour here. We did have some thoughts, just without going too deep into the weeds. Now is a good time, as you're doing all of the things that we're describing about bringing workers back, to look at your policies, and not just simply looking at your remote work policy, not just simply looking at your expense reimbursement policy, but look at your handbook and all the other policies you have. And if you're going to be announcing a bunch of new stuff, now is a good time to rework those things. So look at your arbitration agreements. If you're in California, look at your family leave policies. Those things are changing markedly this year. And just use it as a good opportunity to sort of get a company physical when it relates to HR stuff and come out from this thing emerging stronger and making sure that you're compliant. And then finally, we wanted to just sort of share a little bit of the perspective on the employee paid leave benefits. Jeff was able to tackle that a little bit with his earlier question. There are still tax credits available for paid leave for COVID-related issues. Even though the federal law doesn't mandate them, you can still get tax credits for for giving employees time off for COVID diagnoses, treatment, family members, kids being put home from school or daycare. And most of the state, the federal program and many of the state programs that are echoing it have now added vaccinations to that list of things that people can get paid time off for. And with that, what I'll do is I'll turn it back over to Brian to sort of take us out. But if you have questions or thoughts, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we can address some of those after we're officially logged off, or even address some of them in like a post-event blog for folks. So Brian, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dean, Melissa, and Jeffrey. I know today's topic was a very timely discussion that a lot of people wanted to tune in for. So I really appreciate you all presenting such a timely discussion topic for us to sink our teeth into. I know that the return to work is something that NCIA itself is just trying to figure out ourselves right now. So I definitely know that we're going to be going into some staff meetings coming up a little bit better prepared to have a really intelligent conversation on that. So thank you all so much, as well as all of the other members of the Human Resources Committee that contributed to today's presentation. As always, we're going to close out today's program by giving you all a quick preview of some upcoming sessions underneath the Industry Essentials webinar program that we'd love all of your all's participation with, and then leave you all an opportunity to ask any additional questions that you might have of the panelists over the next few minutes inside the chat room. So as Jeffrey made mention of a few moments ago as well, as always, we'll provide you all with a PDF of today's presentation so you all can reference and review it at your all's convenience post session, and then definitely make use specifically of the contact information slide if you have any direct follow-up or outreach that you want to coordinate with the panelists themselves. All right, so stick around for the next few minutes while we give you all a preview of some upcoming sessions and our panelists leave the virtual stage. If you all have any additional questions, comments, or concerns for them, feel free to post within the chat room over the next few minutes. And once again, thank you so much, Melissa, Dean, and Jeffrey for presenting today's fantastic program. All right. Well, next up, you've all been seeing and hearing about everywhere lately, but what actually is Delta 8 and what does it mean for state and federal policymakers? As I'm sure most of you all know, many consumers have turned to purchasing Delta 8, which is becoming increasingly more available and typically less expensive than Delta 9 products. However, this has led to much disagreement within the hemp and cannabis communities, as well as those associated markets all across the nation. Tomorrow, join Mike and Michelle, as well as a panelist of or a guest panel of amazing experts as they sit down to talk about this uncharted territory, what they're hearing on the ground, and how you can prepare your business for this new market. They'll also discuss how this fits in with the 2018 Farm Bill, associated safety concerns, and of course, the implications for both state and federal policy. Head to the cannabisindustry.org/events following this session to secure your spot for what will surely be a lively, enlightening, and once again, timely conversation. And one last shout out and thank you to the presenting sponsor of today's sessions, March Networks. You can learn more about their products and services at marchnetworks.com, as well as participating in the outro poll, which our team just activated a few moments ago. All right. And with that, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar. Huge thank you once again to all of our members of today's panel for presenting today's session, along with all of our audience members, and most importantly, our member business owners, which make our work possible each and every day. You'll all be redirected to a short 3-minute long attendee survey after leaving the meeting room. Please complete that to gain immediate access to our presentation files. And as always, do note that all NCIA members receive exclusive 30-day access to the formatted video recording of today's session, first posted inside of our members-only community platform, NCIA Connect. Stay on the lookout for a follow-up email that you all receive to your inbox, giving you that direct link to that platform as well. As always, we'll leave you all with this end of event credit sequence highlighting the 25 plus member businesses that make up our Human Resources Committee, as well as all those which participated in this afternoon's session. If you don't see your company included, that means you need to head to thecannabisindustry.org/join today to join the movement for a responsible and equitable cannabis industry. Enjoy, and we'll see you all hopefully tomorrow for the next NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar focusing on Delta 8. Thank you all as always. We'll see you then.